Remember Saturday morning cartoons from the 60s until the 90s? The three big TV networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, would show a block of cartoons every Saturday, generally from 8 a.m. till noon or 1, give or take. The lineups always changed, but just as some examples, you'd see the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Scooby-Doo, Woody Woodpecker, the Pink Panther, Popeye, Alvin and the Chipmunks, the Smurfs, Care Bears, Fraggle Rock, remember that one? Danger Mouse, California Raisins, and Captain N. There were so many, it felt like a blur. So let's look back at this tradition and remember a bunch of shows that I used to watch. We'll talk about the reasons for the decline and how I feel about it today. To be honest, I don't remember hearing the term Saturday morning cartoons until afterwards. I didn't realize it was such a thing. I do remember watching cartoons on Saturday mornings, but I also remember watching cartoons on Sunday mornings, I think. Sometimes even weekday mornings before school, and definitely after school. I remember Ninja Turtles, DuckTales, and Tiny Toons were some of the ones that were on weekday afternoons. So I wanted to look back at this tradition that I somehow participated in but wasn't really aware. Saturday mornings were a giant mix of various shows. Some were reruns of shows that started during the week. Some were based on movie franchises such as Star Wars Ewoks. Anyone remember that? There was even a bunch of them that were what I call junior versions of content that was originally geared more towards teens or adults. Usually they were based on live-action movies, sometimes even R-rated, that got turned into animated shows made for children, like Teen Wolf. That was my first introduction to it. I used to watch the show, and at one time my grandma tried to rent it for me from the video store, but she accidentally got the movie starring Michael J. Fox. I remember being upset, but it was a rental, so I watched it anyway. And the scenes where he was transforming into a wolf definitely startled me. Seeing those fangs come out of his mouth, man, oh man. I also remember some scene where his eyes turned red. That left a terrifying impression on me, and I never thought of the cartoon the same way again. Tales from the Crypt Keeper was another one. I hadn't yet seen the HBO show, but looking back, it's crazy to think that they could take a show with all kinds of gore, swearing, and nudity, and then just make a cartoon out of it for kids. You know, it kind of made sense because it originated as an EC comic in the 50s, so telling those stories through animation kind of brought it back to its roots. Beetlejuice is one I remember better. It's definitely much milder than its live-action Tim Burton counterpart. Beetlejuice doesn't honk his crotch and say nice fucking model, but even though it's made into something child-friendly, it was still a pretty twisted show. Pure nightmare fuel. The animation is really wild and sometimes changes to a CG style every now and then. Whenever that happened, I would be glued to the TV, amazed. I had no idea how that type of animation was done, and some of the images from the show still stick with me today, even being a creative influence. Unfortunately, this show is hard to find on streaming. At the time of this review, I don't see it anywhere, so the only way to watch it is on DVD, but it's worth it. Real Ghostbusters was a classic. It had a long run, even long enough to go through some changes like character designs and some of the voice cast. It was even retitled to Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters. This is another show that really holds up. I've already done an entire review of it many years back. It had no shortage of inventing fascinating ghost characters that made for a plethora of must-have action figures and merchandise. It's funny to think back to when I was playing with toy proton packs and drinking Ecto Cooler that there existed multiple versions of the Ghostbusters. There was Filmation Ghostbusters and, of course, the live-action one that we called the Adult Ghostbusters. That's the one we were encouraged to stay away from. I mean, no dad wants to explain to their kid why a ghost is unzipping Ray's pants. But even after you've seen the live-action film a million times, I think it's important not to forget how awesome the cartoon was and still is. Other shows or films that had animated versions were The Addams Family, Punky Brewster, Bill and Ted, even Flintstone Kids, which was already a cartoon to begin with. I had also watched the original Muppet Show when I was real young, but I think I liked Muppet Babies even more because of all the stories where they go on adventures using their imagination. It made me want to use my own imagination and sometimes imitated the things I'd see them do. This is the show that inspires you to turn a cardboard box into a spaceship. I remember all the stock clips they'd use from Star Wars and the Indiana Jones films. Whenever they'd open a door and there's live action footage on the other side, I thought that was so cool. It's very unfortunate that this show has never been officially released anywhere. The only way to see it is on low quality bootlegs. It's such a shame because this show really holds up. There was a recent Muppet Babies revival show that was also pretty good, and it gave some hope that they would soon release the original. But at the time of this review, I see no news or explanation. The rumor has always been they can't release it because of the copyright on all the Star Wars clips, and that it wouldn't be worth changing those parts. I don't think there's any truth to that, especially after Disney bought Star Wars. But the fact remains, Muppet Babies is still in limbo, and it's a major loss. Then there was Peewees Playhouse. This one I distinctly remember being on Saturday mornings, though it wasn't mainly a live action show, but it had many animated segments such as all the amazing clay and stop motion. This is one of the most hyper and goofiest shows to ever exist. It is really insane. Still worth watching today. I'd even say mandatory just to see the production value and how wild a kid's show can possibly be. Garfield and Friends is another one I really enjoyed as a kid. I was a big fan of the comic strip and used to buy those books that archived them all. The show made the voice of Lorenzo Music synonymous with Garfield. When reading the comics, it's impossible not to imagine that same voice.
Odie, look! It's a flying saucer filled with intelligent belly button lint.
The show was very simple in nature, had a very charming feel, and it was just the usual stuff. Garfield would sit around, be lazy, stir up some trouble. John was always being humiliated. Odie was the subject of slapstick, falling to Garfield's pranks, but remaining peaceful and lovable. And Garfield was just the wise-ass cat that you love to hate. The other half of the show that I didn't care for as much was Orson's Farm or US Acres or whatever the hell it's called. Nothing against it, it's just that as a kid I was there for Garfield. Up until recently it was streaming on Boomerang, but now all of a sudden it's gone. Ninja Turtles was one of the shows that started during the week, but later during season 4 it started showing on Saturday mornings. I remember that being a big deal when I first saw it on Saturday morning. It had a new intro and felt like it was a fresh start for the Turtles, even though my interest started to decline and I started wanting to see more live action versions. Well, the third movie killed all those expectations.
It's hammer time!
Pork rind. Pork rind.
But the show had a long run. I mean, what can you say about Ninja Turtles? It was huge. It was everything. And even though I remember it best as a weekday show, it still was a part of that Saturday morning history. Probably the most interesting thing I remember vividly that came out of this whole thing was when the networks got together for a drug PSA called Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue. It was a big deal. It might have been one of the first and only times to see that many characters all crossing over into one big TV special. You have Michelangelo, Alf, Winnie the Pooh, Kermit, the Smurfs, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Slimer, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and more. The plot involved a kid who's getting hooked on drugs, and the characters all come to help him out, which is strange hearing all these cartoon characters you know talking about pot and crack. But I remember finding it really disturbing. There were all these nightmare hallucination scenes. I remember there's a part where the kid is withering away into a zombie. That screwed up my head. I do get that the idea was to scare kids so they wouldn't do drugs, but it seems they took it in a real weird direction.
Who's that?
Well, it's not Freddy Krueger.
To this day, it stands as one of the strangest kids programs to air on TV. So, good times. Those were the days, right? Well, that's the sentiment, that Saturday morning cartoons are gone. I guess they're gone because otherwise we wouldn't be looking back at them. You can't look back at something that's still here. So let's go check. Here's what's on NBC, CBS, and ABC right now. On Saturday mornings from 8 to 11, they are playing nothing but the news and a bunch of other garbage. But if you go to the other networks like Disney, Disney Junior, Disney XD, Nickelodeon, Nick Jr., Nicktoons, Universal Kids, Cartoon Network, then there's plenty of cartoons. But it's not really specific to Saturday mornings. Lots of these channels play cartoons all around the clock anyway. MeTV is the best example I know of a channel that plays Saturday morning cartoons as a novelty. 8 a.m. it's Tom and Jerry, and at 9 it's Bugs Bunny. Good stuff. And gotta mention, they have Sven Gulli hosting horror films on Saturday nights. I just love that that sort of thing is still going on. So, are there cartoons on Saturday mornings? The answer is a definite yes. But the main networks no longer honor this tradition, so I must concede Saturday morning cartoons are dead. But that's where it becomes nostalgic. So, why did they go away in the first place? Why would they sacrifice that time slot and discontinue such a cherished ritual? Well, there was a number of reasons for the decline. For one thing, the FCC started laying down a bunch of rules on what could be shown to kids. For example, they put a stop to commercials that had tie-in merchandise with the shows. These type of rules became more and more strict throughout the 90s, and the shows were faced with many limitations and restrictions that hampered the creative integrity. So quality went down.
You'll never win by messing with the fellas at the freaking FCC.
There was also a rising number of other networks showing cartoons all throughout the week, like we just saw. And since these channels were part of a cable subscription and not on the main networks, they were given more creative freedom. Not to mention, video games were becoming more and more popular, so Saturday mornings were also a good time to make some progress on your Final Fantasy game or whatever. The rise of VHS also played a part. You could tape shows off TV. You could even set the timer on your VCR to record at any time. I used to always record stuff while I was at school. And then DVD came along. The idea of watching something whenever you want, without commercials, became much more appealing. Nobody wants the show to be interrupted by commercials all the time. Even on cable, the advent of DVR allows you to record the show. I know I've used DVR just so I can watch it later and fast forward through the commercials. To me, that made the idea of watching live TV dead, although I still have a certain affection for it, just knowing that other people are watching at the same time. This could be a whole other topic, but how long will cable TV be around? Well, from what it seems, I think it'll be around for a while. It is declining, but there's still enough people who watch TV. In fact, I still haven't been able to let go of it myself. I watch TV and streaming as well as physical media sometimes, but I mostly find myself using streaming. I think there's entire generations who were brought up on TV and who will keep it around for the rest of their lives. So in another generation or two, it will eventually fade away. In my own assessment, I think the biggest reason for the decline of Saturday morning cartoons is the growing availability of choices. Before, you didn't have much of a choice. Whatever was on the TV, that was what you watched. Sure, you could flip through the channels, but now the choices are endless. By giving everyone more choices, the more unlikely they are to be introduced to something they've never seen. This is something I find interesting. Just to use Looney Tunes as an example, all the Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Roadrunner cartoons, they were such a common staple of TV as a kid. I'd see them all the time, whether at my own house or a friend's house. They were always on the screen. They were such an ordinary part of our lives, and I didn't even have any idea at the time that they were shown in theaters decades before I was born, since the 30s. So if they were around until I was a kid, then what happened? How'd they go away? Well, it really depends which way you look at it, because they are still around. There's been new Looney Tunes shows, there's been a recent Space Jam movie, the merchandising is still there, but something's missing. They just don't have the same kind of everyday household feel. I think a big reason why that happened is because they were moved to Cartoon Network, and then Cartoon Network moved them to its sister channel, Boomerang, which is now its own streaming service, which is fully dedicated to classic cartoons like all the Hanna-Barbera ones. So now you can watch those classic cartoons anytime, 24/7. Sounds great, right? Well, sure, but now it means the only people who are going to go over there to watch it are people who already know it and remember it to begin with. So by making a dedicated channel, I think it's actually isolating it. So is the case with many things being sectioned off into their own place. Everything's separated, everyone flocks to their own thing. But Saturday morning cartoons were a shared community. We were all watching the same thing at the same time. Look, Muppet Babies, that's what's on the TV, that's what you watched. But now, the choices are endless. So if you want cartoons on Saturday morning, you can definitely find them, no problem. But is it the same thing? What were Saturday morning cartoons really about? If you stop and think about what those mornings were like, there was some kind of intangible aspect, a feeling, something special in the airwaves. And whatever that was, I believe is still there. It just needs to be accessed. The fact that anyone remembers it is what's keeping it alive. I know it's there. And here's how I know. My kids helped me relive it. And I didn't even know I was trying to relive it. But usually, every Saturday morning, they sit around the couch and they want me to make them pancakes. So while I'm doing that, I put something on the TV for them to watch. Usually it's live TV. It's one of the Disney channels or something like that. But sometimes I'll head over to Boomerang and put on Scooby-Doo or something. So you're smelling pancakes, there's old cartoons on the TV, and I'm thinking, this seems familiar. And then I realize it's the Saturday morning ritual. And that's what gave me the idea to make this video. One time I shuffled through a few different old cartoons and just put them all on in a row to sort of try and, emulate those old programming blocks, just to show them, hey, this is what Daddy used to watch as a kid. And lots of times they don't like them, so not every show holds up. The old Muppet Babies was almost a winner, but they could tell the picture looked fuzzy because they were from old bootlegs that somebody taped off TV 30 years ago. Come on, Disney, gotta release those. But regardless of the shows, there's a feeling that comes with Saturday mornings, something that signifies the beginning of the weekend. I'm off now, it's a fresh new day, what do you want to do? And maybe for you, it's not Saturday, maybe it's a different day you have off, and that's the special time. And maybe as a kid, you didn't realize how sacred it was. I know I didn't fully realize it in the moment, which is often the case. You don't know it till it's past. But I say, it still lives. Just as Saturday will always be a thing, there's something to celebrate. So I'm curious, how do you celebrate it? Leave a comment and share. Let us know if there's anything special you do to celebrate this pastime and keep the tradition alive.